Ahis Lak Vlak. Happy Pride Month, everybody. Today, tomorrow, and always, we celebrate our LGBTQ two spirit plus relatives. We are so excited to come together with young leaders from Campus Pride. Campus Pride works to create safe environments for LGBTQ2S plus students. I'm Nikki Petrie, Executive Director of the Center for Native American Youth at the Aspen Institute. We are a national educational and advocacy organization that works with Native and Indigenous youth 24 and under across the country to improve the health, safety, and overall well-being of young people. We run programs and initiatives that support Native youth, and we recognize the importance in youth-led solutions and youth-led dialogue. That's what brings us here today. I'm joined by Lauren, Luke, Simone, and Alexander. And I'd like to open up this discussion with a grounding question for all of you. What is it about Pride Month that inspires you the most?
I think for me, what inspires me the most is just the diversity that we get to see, whether that's in person at a pride parade or, especially now online. I think just being able to see people from all walks of life, and we all share this similar thing it's pretty awesome to me.
For me, I think a lot of what really inspires me about Pride Month, what I really feel called to, is the fact that Pride Month is a callback to how much of resistance queer identity and pride is. Pride started as, has continued to be, and will always be a riot. And so often, especially in sort of the very capitalistic pinkwash society that we can live in sometimes, pride can be seen as something fun and fluffy. But it's not, and there's so much of the history and impact of resistance in queer spaces and in pride movements that I love to see, popping up during Pride Month, and really bringing us all together as a community to continue to fight for our rights and our recognition.
For me, I think the most beautiful part of celebrating Pride is, I think I've always kind of described it as honoring everything that we've lost and everything that we fought for, and celebrating what we get to have now. I think we've been able to explore the hardships of the LGBTQ community and overcoming those hurdles, but also just the joy and the beauty and the radiance of getting to say, this is who I am, this is my story. I think this month has definitely just been, it's such a monument for being able to reclaim our own narrative and just letting it stand on its own and just really celebrating that.
For me, I feel like it inspires a lot of hope. It shows it allows people to tell a lot of their own stories, especially during a time of the month that's really centered and, like, I want to say, made for us to be able to share and tell these unique stories of, like, who we are, how we live, and choose to walk our way through this life. And it's very, like, awe-inspiring, I think, to see that and know that it's, like, a great space of comfort for myself included, and for, like, other people that I've met and known.
Oh my goodness, 3 minutes in, I'm already in my feels. Okay, so let's take it back a notch and have everybody introduce themselves. I'd love to hear any kind of tribal affiliation, title, where you work at. So let's go ahead and introduce ourselves.
Cool. Yeah. So my name is Simone. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm currently an intern with Campus Pride this summer.
My name is Alexander. I use he or they pronouns. I am also an intern with Campus Pride, and I do a lot of disability and intersectionality and queer activism work. I'm currently on occupied Lenape land, otherwise known as the Greater Philadelphia area for me personally.
Bonjour, ni Lauren Indigenous Cast, Bengish Mokwa Indigo, Michike Indulem, Ishana Nungom. Hi, my name is Lauren, otherwise known as Sunset Woman in Ojibwe. I'm Turtle Clan from I'm Ojibwe from Walpole Island First Nations. I live in East China, Michigan, which is basically my ancestral lands. I do work with Center for Native American Youth on two of their councils, such as the Democracy's Indigenous Council and the Remembering Our Sisters Council. I also just pair with them on things like this, and I'm really excited to be here. Chimigwech.
Hello, my name is Luke Whitney. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I am a summer intern with Campus Pride this summer. And I also work as a gender and sexuality advocate at the University of Minnesota Morris, kind of working on institutionalized reform for LGBTQ students, as well as just organizing events to celebrate queer identities.
Oh my goodness, welcome everybody. I'm so blown away. Campus Pride has some amazing interns. So it is our hope today that the dialogue is going to be conversational. And though I have some targeted questions for certain folks, it's my hope that we can build off of one another. And I invite all of you panelists to be in community with one another in these conversations. So I'm going to start with Lauren and then invite anybody else to answer as well. But Lauren, can you talk about how you've seen culture intersect with LGBTQ Two-Spirit plus identity?
Sure thing. I've actually been pondering over this question a little bit before I came in today. For me, I've been reading into more about like Ojibwe, like what we would normally say for what we call two-spirited people. And I feel for me like that term really like resonates with me, and I identify very well with that because it feels like it encompasses like a part of me that's kind of hard to explain to other people. When I think about it with my culture as a whole, I mean, overall, when I like first came out, I was also around that time really learning more about my own culture, seeing as like not all of my family knows parts of it. Sometimes we struggle to like we're all relearning bits and bits at a time, because of course this is going to be a lifelong learning road. And I feel like it ties in a lot with my own identity, because I feel like without, like, I wouldn't consider myself Ojibwe, but I would, and not LGBTQ, but I wouldn't consider myself LGBTQ and not Ojibwe. The two very much walk hand in hand. They're one and the same, at least when I think about it that way for myself. And how it's affected a lot of my own experiences personally, once again, just really like cements that in my head for me that these two things they're not interchangeable. It's not as if I'm like only one or only the other. I'm very much both, and they very much just tie into each other.
Yeah, thank you. You know, in my culture, and for folks who may not be Indigenous, in our cultural and traditional communities, Two-Spirit were revered. They were our medicine people. They were healers. Creator chose them to have an interchangeable role, and they were just incredibly respected members of the community. And with the onset of colonization, that was essentially lost. And so, Lauren, I really appreciate you talking about relearning about identity, because we're all on this journey to relearn. And with relearning comes decolonizing concepts of identity, especially. So thank you so much for that. Luke, anybody else wanted to talk about culture and identity? Because I could spend all day on this, so I wanted to hold space before we move on. If anyone else would like to share anything too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not Indigenous, but I am Latina, and for me personally, you know, I see a lot of sort of similar. How do we intertwine this culture that has been colonized and created in such a way so as to ignore queer identities and to look down upon queer identities? And how do we intertwine that, you know, really beautiful, vibrant culture that we love and that is such an important part of us with this other aspect of our identity that it has been taught to shun? And there's so much work with, especially, you know, youth, but activists of all ages, all cultures, within the Latina community, to bring those two identities together and to prove that they are not inherently separate. They are not something that, you know, you don't have to give up being Latina to be queer. You don't have to give up being queer to be Latina. You don't have to hide your identity in certain spaces in order to make yourself palatable or acceptable, because they inherently coexist. And that is something that, you know, if if there are people in your community who don't accept that, who don't acknowledge that, that's not your fault. You know, you are whole in both of those identities without that needing to be validated by other people.
Mm, I love that. Thank you so much, Alex. Luke, being an advocate and working with Campus Pride, what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned from your peers?
Honestly, if there's a big lesson I've learned from my peers so far, it's I think what's interesting about this year versus other years is that this is the biggest team that we've had in any year of Campus Pride. We're all across the country, every single one of us. And I've been able to learn so much from other people who live lives completely different from my own. You know, I've done a lot of advocacy within small town, rural areas. Morris is not really surrounded by a lot of big cities, and I've had to try to figure out how to do advocacy within that area. But have other people um, just kind of be in completely different environments. And something Alex brought up was definitely how all of us can share this resonant feeling of, do we need to sacrifice different parts of ourselves if we want to achieve fully expressing who we are as an individual? And that was something that I think a lot of us shared. I think I've just kind of learned that we all come from different backgrounds and identities. But I think we've been so united in our experiences that have allowed us to really tackle a lot of these issues and make the right stepping stones to move forward for LGBTQ advocacy.
I love that. Thank you, Luke. Simone or Alex, do you have anything that you'd like to add in working with Campus Pride?
I think it's just been an amazing opportunity for me specifically, because personally, I only came out like a couple years ago, and so I don't know that many people within the community. So this has just been a great opportunity for me to, one, kind of, get out of my own comfort zone and really kind of just put myself out there and get to meet some amazing individuals, because all of the interns are great. You're seeing two really cool ones today, but everyone's so awesome, so open, and so helpful. So it's just been a really awesome opportunity.
I love that. Thank you. Alex, I'm going to turn this next question to you. What role does intersectionality play when we talk about pride and advancing equity within the LGBTQ Two-Spirit Plus community?
Yeah, I think that's really important, because the queer community really does pride itself, no pun intended, on being inclusive and making sure everyone feels welcomed and at home and has a space. And that's a value that many of us share and cherish. But at the same time, we, like many communities, have a really damaging history of leaving behind multiply marginalized people. And there are some reasons for that. There are a lot of reasons for this. And some of them made sense in people's minds at the time, but that doesn't validate them. There was a push, for example, well, we're going to fight for marriage equality. We're going to fight for that because that's something that's vaguely palatable. People are starting to come around to that. People are acknowledging that. And this is something we can fight for. But we're going to wait on everything else. We're going to wait on support for trans people. We're going to wait on, how do we get marriage equality for example, disabled queer people who cannot save money if they are in a marital relationship. Don't even get me started on this. But sort of once that was achieved, there were a lot of people who felt that they had been granted their rights and fell off of the activism train, so to speak. They stopped fighting for the people who supported them because they had what they wanted. And we can't leave behind the fact that most queer activism, queer rights, queer liberation movements were started by trans women of color. And trans women of color are some of the most ignored members of our communities. They have always been there. They've always been supporting us. They've always been uplifting voices. They've always been fighting to not get the same energy in return. And this is true for so many multiply marginalized members of our communities. And so I think it's really important when we think about having an intersectional queer community, having an intersectional pride movement, that we acknowledge that we come from all different backgrounds, that we have different lived experiences, that no one can separate the fact that they are queer from their other identities and only look to further that one aspect of themselves. You can't take that part of an individual and elevate it without acknowledging the rest of the person that comes attached to it. So we really need to fight to make sure that all voices are being elevated. We need to fight to make sure that our spaces are accessible. So often when we have spaces in community, they're not actually accessible for example, disabled queer and trans folks, or neurodivergent queer and trans folks. There's even the situation of, well, people can get inside the building, but maybe they can't use the bathrooms, in which case it's not accessible. It doesn't matter how well they can get in if they can't stay there. Or if you have a large community that's not English speaking, or is deaf or hard of hearing, do you have interpreters? Do you have translators? Do you have that material available? Because if you're not fighting for those communities, if those communities don't have the ability to access everything you're talking about, you're going to leave them behind, as well-intentioned as you may be. And you need to be sure that you are actually fighting for inclusion. You are actually fighting to make sure that every member of the queer community has access to our resources, has access to support, and to not leave anyone behind because you feel that you've gotten what you want, or you feel that they're going to burden your movement, because we're all part of this, we're all in this together, and we all need to support each other in order to get far.
Wow. I love how you had talked about just a holistic approach encompassing full identity, showing up as full self, and then advocating for those people, not just for one issue, but holistically. That's so well said. Would anybody else like to add in?
I completely agree with you, Alexander. People, I think it's just like, I think when I'm thinking about it, it's very easy for some people to just hop on as soon as you think, oh, it's like remotely beneficial to you, and then hop off. But then, and I realize like part of it is because we've been kind of raised to be very like individualistic. Like, for example, I mean, this is a kind of different thing, but when I'm thinking about individualistic, like when there was COVID and how most people just like overstocked as much as they could for themselves and then left other people to just, suffer, which included a lot of like disabled people and or like older people who can't actually go and like grab these things or like fight somebody else to like go and like run with a big thing of toilet paper. And thinking about that with the community, like it's like I've seen like a lot of these spaces just not like they don't hold that same space for like others, or even then if they like try to, like when I think about it from a like racial perspective, then it's like they all have these spaces that it's mainly like white dominated, and it kind of becomes like a struggle because sometimes it can be tiring being like one of the only like person of color or a small group of them in this room, and then you have like it being mainly dominated by white people, and you just kind of have to like sit there and it's draining. So I really feel like we as a whole need to like focus on that. I really enjoyed your point though. You said it very well. So Chimiwach.
Thanks so much. Luke or Simone, did you want to add in anything before we move on?
Oh, you guys did that. Fantastic.
Yes. All right. Okay, thanks so much. So Simone, I'm actually going to kick it to you now. And I want to learn from you how to celebrate, and this kind of ties in with what Alex was talking about a little bit too, but how can we celebrate the voices of people of color within the Pride movement?
Yeah, I think really in order to begin celebrating the voices of people of color within the Pride movement, of course, you have to acknowledge the origins of the movement. And of course, today being the anniversary of the Stonewall riots, we have to, of course, bring that up. And, I think it's extremely important for us to make sure that people know that Pride was started by trans women of color. And that a lot of what is mainstream, about Pride today in the LGBT community, I personally believe was really derived from people of color. Whether it's fashion, performing, from the ballroom scene, or music from the ballroom scene, lingo from the ballroom scene, just as a as an example, and so much more stuff. But I really just think it begins with giving credit where credit is due. And I think that's happening a little bit more today, but of course it can be improved upon greatly. And so I think in wanting to celebrate our voices, we have to really acknowledge and pay respects to those who came before us, especially those who are, within marginalized communities.
Mm, that's so important. And we've been doing some learning of our own, especially for Indigenous communities, about the implications of erasure and what that does on someone's psyche today. So when you talk about the history of the movement, the origins of the movement, it's really not that far ago, because we're still understanding and learning and being impacted by the origins of the movement today. And so it's so important to make sure that we're uplifting people of color, recognizing, celebrating, holding space holistically, as Alex had said, especially people of color in this movement. So thank you so much, Simone. I wonder, Lauren, Luke, I'd love to kind of bring you into this conversation as well. Do you have anything that you'd like to add?
I honestly think that Simone hit it right on the head with that.
Yeah, I honestly agree with all of the points Simone made. I think in terms of how we can improve, I just think as like a white person, I think it's important that a lot of people acknowledge the privilege, especially during Pride, that a lot of white people benefited off the hard work of people of color, particularly trans women of color, who were a huge part, if not like the original part of this movement. I think it's using that privilege to uplift the voices of marginalized communities, of marginalized people, and have their stories be heard, and have and give credit where credit is due, like Simone said, 100%.
Thank you. Wow. Lauren, I'm going to shift over to you now. You had a very exciting weekend at the LGBTQ plus Pride Month event at the White House. Can you share about your experience and what does it mean to you?
Sure thing. So yes, this Friday I was invited to attend a event at the White House for Pride, LGBTQ plus people. I believe a proclamation was signed shortly before it started. I do have a copy of that proclamation. I don't have it on me right now. My mom is currently holding it for me because otherwise it might get messed up. It was overall very exciting and a little bit nerve-wracking. I was in the room with quite a diverse group of people, and I really appreciated the opening. I feel bad because I'm forgetting names right now, but he opened the space very well, talking about his own experience as a Afro-Latina trans man, and talked very well about his personal experiences. And I got to like chat with him as well as some other, as well as a like nice diverse group of youth on Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus experiences. And to me, it was very interesting to like being one of those youth, one of those like Two-Spirit people sharing that sort of space with people, because I feel like for a very long time, especially with the former administration, that seemed very like closed off and like anti LGBTQ, and especially I think POC LGBTQ. And for that space to I think be opened up more again. And I know that there's plenty of improvement and work that needs to be done, but to see like some starts being made and to get to I think witness that firsthand that day was pretty exciting. It's pretty neat.
That's wonderful. This is kind of riffing off of that. Does anybody want to share what their hopes for the new administration would be on the issue of Pride? Yeah, good.
I'm trying to think of an answer if I have one. But.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot to say. I feel like in order for politicians to, get into office, sometimes they inflate a lot of our hopes and dreams and, really kind of pull on our heartstrings at what we would like to see in order to kind of get a vote. it's hard to say what I would like to see happen, because I mean we haven't seen much yet, but it's a lot. But I try to remain hopeful, and even if it's nothing that we see at the scale of whatever the president decides to do, or the executive branch. I think it's just important for us to really hone in on nonprofits who are doing great work, and do things local if you have to. I mean, just try and make a difference where it matters, and or not where it matters, where you can, I should say. So, yeah.
I think there's a big issue with talking because, sorry, I have a little bit of a brain fumble, but I think a really difficult part of this, of why it's so difficult to answer this, is because I think particularly, I think a lot of people here, generally marginalized communities, the LGBTQ community, are grateful that the former administration wasn't present continually. But just because there is like a new era for the presidency, just because there's a new presidency, a new administration, it doesn't change the fact that there's still many issues harming the LGBTQ community and plaguing marginalized communities, and that there still needs to be a lot of institutionalized reform, a lot of answers that aren't just a quick fix. Um, I think it's just a matter of recognizing that, yes, I think it's good with the progress that we've made, but there's still so much more to go. And of course, we're grateful for now this new shift in presidency, but that doesn't change the fact that all of the damage caused by the former administration isn't gone away, and it hasn't changed the current political or social climate that we're currently living in, which has been an attack on the LGBTQ community, on marginalized communities. It's a lot more than just winning the presidency to create change. It's a lot more than that. And it's a lot more complicated than, I think there is no easy, really quick fix. And I think the administration has to acknowledge that there has to be a lot of work done. I think, like Simone said, it starts with acknowledgement. It starts with just referencing the fact that there has been a lot of damage done, and it's time to work on fixing that.
Right. I just kind of feel like at this point, my bar for like what might happen is pretty low at this point. I think it's almost like practically on the floor. Because I've just kind of like seen everything that's happened over like the past couple of years with like administration changes, things like that. I'm kind of at this point, I'm honestly just hoping that like at the very least we can stop, having such a big attack on our like communities and other marginalized communities. But I would love to see like bigger changes take place. But unfortunately, I don't hold like very high hopes for that because I don't want to get disappointed severely because.
Yeah, I think a big part of the problem is that the government structure we have is inherently not liberatory. And because of that, institutional reform and institutional change to benefit, LGBTQ communities is incredibly difficult to come by. And so much of that change has and will continue to fall on the shoulders of grassroots activists, nonprofits, like Simone mentioned, and community work, because it's simply not something, it is built into the system that it will not happen. And so it needs to come from within communities and spread that way, rather than looking for top-down change to this country. It needs to work, I don't want to say bottom up, because that sounds not like what I mean, but that is the opposite of top-down. So
I completely agree. And Luke, something that you said really resonated with me. And it's a cultural teaching that for healing and transformation and change, we need to hold space where we can lay down our truths next to each other, show up equal, equitable. And only then, when we have that and we lay down our truths like that, the truth and acknowledgement that you talked about, then we can get through to transformation. Then we can get through to the next step. And so it sounds like that's what the administration, we really need to hold that space for LGBTQ Two-Spirit plus relatives. Okay, I've been taking so many notes. I'm like, where's my questions? All right, so this is now going to be a section for everybody. And please, whoever would like to start, and then let's make sure to really kind of build off of each other. But the question is, Why is it important to hold spaces like these for groups of different identities and cultures, even different geographic locations, to come together, build coalitions for LGBTQ Two Spirit Plus people?
Okay, Lauren, you want to go ahead?
Sure, sure. I think it's really important to hold these spaces because I think, for one, it really opens up like a whole bunch of different perspectives. Like, I know my own perspective might be differing from what, like, some of my friends, and theirs might be different from some of their friends. And when we hold these spaces, we're able to like maybe learn more about what are some of these issues, because I can think of maybe like issues for my own, for more of like myself and like kind of the community that I know. But then you may hear it, like you may hear this and be like, well, here are some of the issues for my community, and we can bring these together and work on ways to like help solve these issues and advocate better for these issues, so that way we're not just like spreading, I don't know, false news, and or just like only thinking maybe in just like a small, like little, it's that small thing that is like a small fish tank. We're in like a big ocean here, so we should be trying to like reach out, make these connections, and work on these things together as one. If that makes sense.
I completely agree with that. And I also think there's a lot to be said for being in community where education doesn't feel like a burden. Because so often, when we're talking about, you know, queer liberation, Latina liberation, Indigenous liberation, whatever identity it is, we're in spaces where we feel like we need to educate about ourselves in a way that doesn't feel like it's going to be respected, or it's not going to be heard, it's not going to be listened to. And education and educating other people can be taxing. This was mentioned earlier. I think Lauren mentioned this. It's draining. But being in community and being in space where that education feels like empowerment rather than taxation is really relieving. Because in a space like this, I know something I bring to the table will be listened to, will be acknowledged, will be respected, and will be brought forward rather than being heard and then dumped in the trash can. And that's something that's it's really important to have spaces like that where we can build upon each other's education, each other's learning.
I think for me, because of my personal experiences, I think the biggest strength of having this conversation is it teaches us to be aspirational. Getting to know the people that I've worked with alongside Campus Pride and getting to hear their stories and getting to hear what the work they're passionate about, it inspires me. Getting to work with the Center for Native American Youth, it is inspiring. It shows that there are people who are willing to show up and have these conversations. I grew up in a small town where people didn't really acknowledge LGBTQ identity as much, and there wasn't as much institutional support, whether from schools or the local community. And for a long time, you feel like you have to go through all of these experiences and discussions by yourself, alone. And to have these moments to look towards other people who see you and who hear you and feel the same experiences that you do, it's letting you know that there is people who are fighting alongside you, even if you don't see it. And I think if there's people who are watching this, it's seeing the people who are sitting up here and talking about their experiences. It's a reminder that there are people who are putting in the work to provide a groundwork for everyone. I think that's been like the most empowering thing to me, is hearing everyone's story today and getting to have this conversation.
I think for me, I think the best way I could put it right now is like there's levels to the LGBTQ plus community. It's not linear. You're not going to know everything as soon as you come in. And I think it really just encourages or it allows people to know that you don't have to know everything just to be in something like this. You come in with an open mind, come in ready to learn, um, and take that knowledge back to your community and make something happen from it. But yeah, yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. I love what was said about educating to empower without feeling drained, and I think that that can be done in such a good way, like today, where you're educating, but you're not getting drained from it. And so I love what you had said there, Alex. So thank you. Um, so this is also for everybody. Where do you find your strength, healing, and self care as you're kind of navigating this movement, as you're navigating these broader, maybe unfamiliar spaces? Where do you find your strength?
I think for me, I find a lot of strength simply in community, and in knowing that there are support systems, there are other people who are going on this same journey that I am, who are trying to figure this out, who are fighting just as hard as me, and not feeling alone in this really exhausting path. Um, and on top of that, when it comes to self-care and you know making sure that you are a priority, there's a lot to be said for not needing to know everything, because there's a push, especially in a very digital age where information is so easy to access, that you need to be on top of every single issue. You need to know exactly what's going on with everything at all times, and if you don't, you're a bad activist. You're not keeping up with whatever. You're not, being an ally to X, X, and X. But, you know, it's also really, really difficult to constantly be on top of every single negative thing that's happening in the world. Um, and it's okay to take steps back from that and to take time for yourself where you are not paying attention to terrible things. Because if that is the only thing you focus on, you are going to burn out so quickly, and you're no good to anyone when you're burnt out. It's much more beneficial to take that time to separate yourself and then to ease yourself back into the work, and back into the movements when you are recharged and you are energized and you have the momentum, the internal momentum to keep moving forward and to keep fighting without feeling like you are, pushing yourself up against a brick wall every single day.
I completely feel you on that, Alexander. Like that just reminded me, like you can't fill yourself. You can't fill others with an empty cup. And I feel the exact same way. For me personally, I find a lot of my like healing and strength and whatnot in the communities that I am in, that I get to share space with my sisters in the Remembering Our Sisters movement, with my family, with my friends, or sometimes even just being alone. Sometimes I like have to take time out of my like without really interacting with people and just like sitting with myself and thinking sometimes about my activism, my advocacy, what I want to do, what change I want to see. But overall, it's for I just sit there and I'll think more so about, instead of just that, just talking, I guess, with me and the creator, or sometimes just hanging out with a friend. Like sometimes we'll be having these serious talks, but overall it's just like a very like calm environment where I can't always put my focus towards these things, because once again, you can't fill others with an empty cup. You can't continue to do that, because all you'll do is like you'll drain yourself, like you said. And I just feel like honestly that's where I find a lot of my strength, my healing, my peace, and just my center.
I think me personally, I find my strength in knowing that as I am is good enough. But there's always room for improvement, of course. Um, and I think in, being extremely personal and candid right now, therapy, it's not for everyone, but if you need to go, it should definitely be something, that people really look into, because it's truly changed my mindset, and my outlook on life in general, being a Black woman, being a queer Black woman, and all the intersections and everything like that. And as far as self-care, I'm more of the creative artsy type. So, painting, poetry, filming, anything where I think I can see what may not be represented in the media right now, I can kind of create for myself. So that's kind of what I do.
I love this. How inspiring. So the last question, our closing question, is what message do you have for young people who are coming into their identity?
I would say it's okay to change. The way you come into this might not be how you end up in the end. And staying open to, exploring new things about yourself, exploring things with other people, whatever it may be. I think just being open to change in general is really kind of at least it was for me, a healthy mindset. And didn't cause me to put too much pressure on myself to fit under this one umbrella or anything like that. So
I think honestly that for one, like Simone said, that it like things may change, like labels can change. I know recently I've been kind of struggling with like labels myself. I actually had a friend who said you don't need to use them if like you don't want to. Like do what makes you feel comfortable. Not everything is set in stone so much like we all think it is. And also like there's very much a community that's always here and like ready and willing and able to support you. It may not be the community that you thought it might be, depending on where you are, but there is that community and it's very much out there and they're listening, and they're like more than willing to support and help you.
I think that I completely agree with what's been said. Um, and I also think just know that you will grow in this, and that where you are right now may not be where you're going to be in 2 years. It may not be where you're going to be in 5 years. It may not be how you identify. It may not be how you think about the world. There's so many things that are going to grow and change with you, and that doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It doesn't mean that if you came out in a way that you no longer identify with, that's fine. That there's nothing wrong with that. It does not mean you were lying. It does not mean that you were, misleading people. Um, and it does not mean that you didn't do enough soul searching. People change, people grow, you will, and that's a good thing. You're supposed to do that.
This one's a little bit more personal, but I would say there's so much joy not yet lived. Because growing up, I had this idea that life, when I came into my own identity, I just kind of grew accustomed to the idea of, am I ever really going to be loved as who I am? And really, can I ever be successful? And is life just going to be this continual climb and you're just never going to reach what's ever on the other side? But looking at everything I've been able to achieve now and getting to see what other people have been able to achieve through time, it just reminds you that there's going to be so many more good days that are ahead and so many more times worth celebrating. And I think that's just been like the most beautiful part of the lesson I could give. There's so much joy not yet lived.
Thank you all so much. My sincerest appreciation to Simone, Lauren, Luke, and Alexander for joining us today and the meaningful conversation that we've had together. I want to encourage you all to hold space for young people, uplift and empower our LGBTQ2 Spirit Plus relatives, not just this month, but always. And let's normalize holding spaces of acceptance and love for youth. Let's educate to empower. Let's celebrate all that Pride is, a history of resistance of queer and Pride spaces. And let's celebrate joy, beauty, and radiance. And to our LGBTQ2S plus youth leaders, you are whole, and there are so many good days ahead. Be sure to follow the Center for Native American Youth, Center for Native, and Campus Pride on Facebook, Instagram, and more to continue the conversation with us. Thank you so much. Limna Jinchas Boos.